Our guest is a graffiti pioneer turned legendary artist. In this episode, Cey Adams discusses his journey from the streets of New York to global galleries, his influence on hip-hop, iconic album covers, and his unique blend of street art and mainstream culture. It's time to dive in.
Ladies and gentlemen, Cey Adams, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start right off the bat from the beginning, because you started over 40 years ago and you were very much in the middle of the hip hop culture in New York in the mid 70s and mid 80s. What was it like to be in that environment? What was New York like in those days?
It was rough. New York was a tough place back in the day. But again, I was a teenager, so I didn't know it was rough. It was the only thing that I knew. But man, it was just such a great time to grow up because you had, in addition to hip hop being born, you had Blondie and the Talking Heads and the Ramones and all of these bands sort of, taking off in New York, and being a part of that was a big deal. When I say being a part of that, just mean being aware of it. The idea that it was happening in my city, not that I was able to go out and do a whole lot. I was really, really young, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, but that definitely caused an impact for you and people in your neighborhood to kind of feel that all of this is going on right here next to us, and we some point in some lifetime we're going to be able to be part of that as well and enjoy it.
Yeah, and like I said, and then it was the beginning of hip hop. Like, 12-inch singles are starting to surface, and this is when Kool Herc, who's now legendary for starting, one of the first block parties that really brought all the elements together. Those were all things that were happening around me. And I thought it was exciting for sure, but by no means did I think that we were changing the world. I just thought we were having fun.
Isn't that usually all the great things happens first? Kind of enjoying yourself, having a good time, and then see what else happens from there.
Yeah, no, I think so for sure.
Now you were very young because you started as a graffiti artist.
Yeah, when I was a
How
teenager.
old? Yeah, how old were you when the first time you saw Kane and you started spraying the walls?
I don't know, 16, 17, somewhere in
Hmm.
there. I mean, I was really, really young. And it was, again, it was, I was in junior high school. And so there was a long time ago. But all of my friends were into it, and it just seemed like something really cool to do. And short of getting in trouble by my parents, I was willing to sacrifice anything to be a part of, the graffiti scene.
How many times did you get caught and you got in
I
trouble?
was lucky. I didn't get caught, but like you just have to be faster than the slowest person. That's the only thing I thought about.
The interesting thing, Joe, because right now, of course, graffiti artist has an incredible reputation. It's something that really look as art at the highest level. But back then, it wasn't the case. It was frowned upon. It's even illegal. Were you aware of what you were doing? Were you aware that this can really get you in real trouble? Or at that point, it was like, you know what, whatever, we'll see what happens.
I was a teenager. Like, the danger was my middle name. You know, it really is true. It was just you really can't understand what it's like walking on an elevated platform and climbing up to I don't know, like 200 feet in the air to paint on a train. It's like, could you find anything more dangerous? I mean, it's literally like, imagine, you might as well be, a trapeze artist on the high wire. But to be doing that as a teenager and literally risking your life to paint your name on the side of a train, it sounds crazy when I say it out loud now.
No, it's funny. So there was competition between you and your friends to see like whoever could get like the hardest spot to do it or things like that.
Yeah, but friendly competition. I
Yeah.
mean, we were all allies, but that was really the name of the game. It's like, getting up, like, the bigger the better. I mean, this is America. That's where that comes from. More, more, more. And that's what we did. We just all wanted to be better than the next guy or girl that came along. And it's the only way you could gain respect, was showing people that you could do something that no one else could do.
That you had what it takes to do that. Now, you were, as you mentioned, early teenager then. What were your plans for the future? Were you thinking about the future those days? Did you aspirations, things that you wanted to accomplish? I mean, at that point you mentioned, high school, looking to, all right, I know I'll be an adult in a few
You
years.
know,
And
I've been an artist my whole life, and I've never wanted to be anything but an artist. So and my plans were just that, to figure out how to become an artist. I don't know. My parents had other ideas for me, but that was my only idea. I didn't want to be a fireman. I didn't want to be a policeman. I didn't want to go into the military. I wanted to be an artist.
was there anybody that kind of use you mirror as a role model? Someone say, okay, I want to be like that guy. I want to pursue it. No, follow those footsteps.
No, no, just art. I didn't have art heroes growing up. By the time I was in my 20s, I had art heroes, but before that, I didn't have any. And the people that were my art heroes, luckily, were also New Yorkers. People like Robert Rauschenberg, Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, Jasper Johns, people like that.
So you said in your 20s and then you decided to have your heroes. At what point, I mean, you mentioned you always wanted to do this, be an artist, and that's the only thing you were ever going to be. But at what point did you realize, no, I'm good at this? I now really want to do this for a living. I actually have something interesting to say. People is gravitating towards this. What point
I
that
knew
that
that.
confidence?
I knew that before I was 10 years old, because
Tell me
I've been.
more about that.
When I say I've been an artist my whole life, I really do mean that. I mean, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. You know, straight through my teenage years, I've been an artist my whole life, and so by the time I am in my 20s and I'm writing graffiti, it's just a matter of, how do I take this skill and turn it into a real job and profession. And I just had to figure out that piece of the puzzle, because that's the thing I did not know. I knew how to do all the other things because I, read books and I studied and I practiced and practiced and practiced. This might sound like a strange analogy, but I was listening to Bruce Springsteen talk, and he said, I played more shows and played in more bars and clubs than most people realize. And that's the way I am about being an artist. I've drawn and painted for years
Mhm.
before having an opportunity to actually show my work to somebody in a gallery context.
But it feels like you always have that confidence too, as you mentioned too. As a 10-year-old, you knew it. I'm good at this. I get
Yeah.
this. This
I
is
mean, but that confidence is born out of being a New Yorker. My friends were young, but they were all confident and cocky. They're not like, art school kids where they, teachers have to like scrape them up off the ground. Like, we were like hardcore. And even though a lot of my friends went to art school, what we learned was in the street, and we got our education in the street. So we were all tough. And you have to have a confidence in order to survive in New York City, especially when you're young and you're a kid, because you're going into the land of giants and adults. And if you don't have confidence, you will absolutely fail.
At what point did you have your first breakthrough? Let's say the first time you realized, all right, I have my first exhibition, I have a gallery, I have a representation. How old were you then?
19.
Wow. And what
Yeah,
was like to be 19-year-old already accomplishing all of those things?
it didn't feel like an accomplishment. It just felt like, oh wow, I've cracked through. But again, it's always like on to the next thing. Oftentimes when people are patting themselves on the back, they're not paying attention to where they're going. And where I come from, you don't have time to think about how great you are because you're too busy hustling to get to where you're going. And I never really, you know, dwelled on it. I will say I remember the first time I got a real check and I had like a brick of money in my hand and I was able to go to my parents and go, look, I did this legally. And that was a great feeling.
What was the thing that the parents told you then when you came
Uh,
home with that?
I don't know. I think they just took half of it and paid some bills. I don't know that they really thought much about me as much as,
uh,
okay, here's one that's not getting in trouble. I come from a big family. And so, they didn't have a lot of time, to, think about how great I was because they were always putting out other fires in the house. So if I'm doing okay, good.
Priorities, right? Keep the
Right.
kids alive. I like what you said about we don't have time to be patting ourselves in the back because we need to looking for where we're heading. I think this is something that people can walk away with this day, feel like we need to kind of celebrate our wins and be, and enjoy it and things like this. But you have this mentality like, you know what, it's done. Check the box, move on to the next.
Yeah. I mean, by example, we're just living in a different time now where young people are more fragile. I have grandkids and I have to, you know, they just require a different kind of nurturing. When I was young, people just sort of threw you into a situation and you had to figure it out. And failure was just not an option because, nobody really cared. It was just that kind of thing. They didn't care about your feelings, they didn't care about what you were doing. It's just, okay, don't burn the house down. That was it.
Were you paying attention to people's opinion of your work as an artist? Sometimes critics or somebody that you respect at 19-year-old. Was that something that kind of resonated with you, or not quite?
Not really. I mean, what we were doing was graffiti. It was outlaw art. So the idea of getting even a little bit of acceptance from traditional media outlets was enough. It was just
Mm.
enough. I mean, we wanted respect from our peers on the subways. That felt like, some kind of validation because those were the people that we interacted with. We didn't really interact with the world of the New York Times
Mhm.
and adults. It was, our little, friends that wrote graffiti. Those were the people that we wanted to impress.
And what was the highest level of respect on that in that community? What would it be like? Would it be like a nod or something like that?
No,
What would
you
it be like?
want to know what it was? It's people knowing who you are.
Mm,
There's a song that came out that was sung by, the late great Irene Cara. Fame. Baby, remember my name. The end. That's all you can. Like, if you met somebody in the Bronx and they knew who you were, you did your job. They know who you are. Like, to be all city where you could go to any borough and somebody knows who you are, that means you did work. And that was a big deal growing up. All we wanted was respect in and around the city, nothing else.
So then at this point, you already have your gallery, you're doing graffiti, you were enjoying yourself, having a good time, respect from your peers. And then you just join, you know, go into the music industry and started working on that aspect. How did you bridge that gap between, the music and the art and be more involved with artists at that level?
I didn't think of it in that way. I didn't think about it being a gap. I just thought it was the next inevitable step. I just wanted to move on, and I felt like the music business, I had a lane all by myself. It was just, I'm going to start doing this, and this will be another direction that I can go in, and my friends were at the time going off to Europe and Asia and all these other places, and I thought, well, I'm going to master being in the you know this new space, and trying to make a name for myself in the world of graphic design.
Anything, do you have to adapt any aspect of your work to kind of not fit in, but to create this new lane that you're carving for yourself to make sense of it?
Well, I had to definitely learn how to do traditional cut and paste graphic design. I had to learn this brand new language. Well, it was new to me.
Hmm.
I had to learn how to do that. And that was not easy because it's literally like speaking a foreign language and you only know English. But in order to communicate in this world, you had to learn this language and you had to be good at it, because if you weren't good at it, it was going to cost, the record companies time and money. And back then, they didn't want to spend 5 cents on something if they didn't have to. And if you made mistakes and it cost them money, it would cost you money.
What was the first one for you? Your first album that you designed?
Um, there was a record by a woman called the real Roxanne, and it was called Bang Zoom, and she was on a label called Select Records. This is the same label that UTFO was on.
Mm.
So I knew their manager, and Full Force was also on this label, and Full Force were the producers and songwriters behind Lisa Lisa and the Cult Jam. So that was the first, and this is sort of happening right alongside Def Jam, but that was the first thing that I did
Hmm.
was for the Real Roxanne, and recently I was in LA for the Grammys, a couple of months back, and I found the record that I did in a $2 record bin, and I just remember buying it, and it was something like $7 to $10. And the guy's like, "Man, you're really staring at that record for a long time." And I said, "I know, this is a really important record." And I didn't go into anything about designing it because he probably didn't care. He just wanted his $7. But it was a lot of fun to see that, and
Yeah,
I think about that often.
those special moments, right? That you kind of can look back and say, okay, a little pat on the back every once in a while.
Well, now I can spend time patting myself on the back all day long, but there's always something to do.
Now, at that time, you start collaborating with artists as well, with musicians. So you kind of understand what the album's about. Is there any specific thing that you remember, like a lyric, a word that inspire you to create a specific vision for a specific album?
Well, you have to understand, working with the artists from Def Jam during that early period, it was just so much fun because you know th- the movement hadn't exploded yet, so there
Mhm.
wasn't all of this interest in all these different places. It was just this small little lane of like-minded people, and I'll just say, for example, working with Beastie Boys, we were doing something on our own terms, and it wasn't being managed by adults. It was just us making something that we were passionate about, me handling the art, the guys obviously dealing with the music and production and all of it. But to be able to do something like that with your friends and not have it be this thing that had a lot of hands in the pot was just great because we were just making our work the way we wanted to make it, and we just hope that other people were going to like it as well, and as it turned out they did.
How early in the process where you start developing the creative look of the album was, of course, we have to make sure that the album is ready or listen to the words and things like that. But how early do you start getting involved in those process?
You know what? It wasn't nearly as complicated as it sounds. It's a couple of us sitting in the room with the artist, and we kick around some ideas, and we think about, okay, does this look good on a cover? What's the photograph going to be? What's the logo going to look like? Oh, I'm going to do something by hand. There wasn't a lot of thinking, and there wasn't a lot of outside input, and first and foremost, it just had to look as good as the other things that were in the marketplace. And back then, DIY was the way that people did things because there wasn't, all of these, fantastic, expensive outlets to make things. You did it by hand. And you were, for the most part, only talking to a small group of people when the record was out there. So it wasn't a big complicated thing that required a whole lot of thought. We were making music for our friends and people that we thought would like the same types of things that we liked.
Now, okay, so that's an interesting thing. So I mentioned back in the day, it was a bunch of guys, like-minded people, kind of hanging out, putting things together, enjoying themselves. Now
Men
hip
and
hop,
a lot
men
of
and
people
women.
were guys, but yeah, it was, that's why I say it's young people. Then
Mhm.
everybody's covered.
Yeah, that's actually important to highlight because, as you mentioned, a lot of times we will not acknowledge or be aware that there was no everybody was involved in the process. But
Yeah.
looking now, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It covers everything, every aspect of the world, from culture, fashion, music, art, everything. I'm assuming that back in the day is not something you ever foresee that it would become such a phenomenon.
You mean the future? No. When you're young, who's spending time thinking about the future? Like the future is like a week from now. I wasn't daydreaming about, the year 2000. Although I did make a painting in the 80s, and I think in 1980, and it was titled, Graph 2001. And in my mind, I thought that was like 100 years into the future. I didn't realize it was, just 40 years.
Crazy, right? I remember 2000 as well. We thought like, oh, the clocks are going to reverse, the computers are going to go crazy, it's going to be the end of the world. And here we are. How did you balance the work that you were doing at Def Jam, but also your own work? Your with the galleries and everything else. Were you able to keep a good balance around all those responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't complicated. When I started doing design, I had a design firm called The Drawing Board, and we furnished our services to Def Jam.
Mhm.
Um, I was putting all my energy into that, and then nights and weekends I would go to my studio and I would make art. But it was like church and state; they did not compete. It was just, this was my day job, and I was happy that I could get all my creative frustrations out designing records. And then if there was something I wanted to do that felt a little bit more raw and edgy and outlaw, I would do that in my paintings. And it was just, it was not a problem. And also, the movement hadn't exploded yet. So it wasn't like there was all these outlets to showcase what you were doing.
And then soon after that, you start working with a lot of corporations. You done work for almost some of the biggest ones in the world. When was that thing started happen to you, and how was your immediate reaction?
Well, I was fascinated when the big corporations had creative directors that were smart enough to understand that the energy was still in the street, and they wanted to play with us. And for a creative director for a company that's been around for 100 or 200 years to call you and say, we want to commission you to make something for us in your style, with your name, with your look and feel and aesthetic, was gigantic, because we never imagined that big brands were really checking for what we were doing, when in reality they were looking at us to show them the future. And that's a it's just so much fun, because you want to talk about a full circle moment, for them to finally acknowledge that what we are doing, as it relates to art and music and culture, has power. And for them to say, we're gonna give you a slice of the pie, and we're gonna have you help us, is really, in some cases, what we were waiting for a long time. Even though we were doing our own thing on our own terms, anybody that says they don't like validation is not telling the truth. Everybody likes it. And to be able to do those things side by side is, what it's all about. You got to make things on your own terms, and somebody's going to partner with you and not micromanage what you're doing.
Is that something that you look before you start doing more collaborations? And that's something that you still do when companies reach out to you? You're looking for someone who will give you the creative freedom, not micromanage, be able to understand your point of view.
I'm not looking for anybody. They're looking for me. it,
No, I
it's
understand.
like, yeah, I it's always nice when you have a partner that really understands who you are. And that's the one thing that's great about the brands that I work with, is that they really understand who I am. They're not just looking to fill a void and say, "Oh, let's just get generic artist X because they can do it all." They're like, "No, we want you for the unique recipe that you bring to the table." And that's what we are partnering with, not just anything. And it's not one size fits all. And I think it did take them a long time to figure that out. But once they did, they're like, oh, now we understand. These are all unique individuals. Like, good idea.
Yeah, what I meant was that you were in that position that you got to pick. You know what I mean? Like, who do you want to collaborate with, and what are the things that you're looking for in those collaborations that make sense to you to be invested? And I guess you just answered that question with all of that as well. Now, during
Yeah,
your
I mean,
creative process, go ahead.
no, all I was going to say was, I only have one criteria. I want to be treated well. The end. Like, whatever that means, that's what I want. And I think that it's no different than any kid, any person that's college age, middle age. Everybody wants to be treated well, whatever that means to them.
Yeah. No, I think everybody can relate to that. Doing your creative process doesn't matter if you were talking about an album or your own work itself or collaborating with a big corporation. How did everything start? So are you someone who creates in a vacuum? Are you someone who just take walks, music? What's is that like a process, a recipe?
I don't know about a recipe, but I like to always get a full picture of what I'm dealing with. So if you can provide me with materials and content and things that can help me paint a better picture of who you are as the client, then you know ultimately that's the best thing, because I'm gonna bring my own stuff to it anyway. But I like to know who I'm working with. And, in the end, I want to make sure that they're happy. It's not just, here, I made this thing, take it, and, like, I hope it works for you. I really want to make sure that I'm putting in all of the things that I need to make sure it's a success, because my name is on it. And it's taken me a lifetime to get here. And so I want them to be happy. But I also want to be happy. And a lot of that starts with them knocking on my door.
Are you optimistic about the future?
Sure. Yeah, I'm here. I'm optimistic right now.
So as you look at our world, where we're heading, now we're talking about a lot of NFTs, and there's obviously different technology involved, and a lot of AI, and all those things. When you look at all those things, you see nothing but opportunity.
Well, I don't know if I see opportunity for me, but I certainly see opportunity for, young people that are coming up that are going to figure out a way to take the technology, do something interesting, hopefully have a good time in the process, and maybe even change the world. Because in the end, that's really the role of an artist, is to make something that makes people think and hopefully change the world.
What kind of grandfather are you? Are you the one that's part them or more restricted?
I don't know. I'm not, this wild, rebellious guy anymore. Um, I want my kids to know who they are, and I want them to be true to themselves. And if they can be good to other people in the process, then mission accomplished. All the other stuff will work itself out, because, the minute they go out into the world and they make friends, those friends are going to influence their thinking. Then they get older, they're going to have a partner. That person is going to influence their thinking. And I just don't want them to lose who they are, because oftentimes we can sacrifice years of our lives trying to make some other person happy, and they might not be the right kind of person that's going to help you make the world a better place.
So we're at the point of the show now that I like to ask three questions to all the guests that come here. So here they are. One, we want you to recommend us a book. It can be something that you just read recently or one of your favorites. It's up to you. A movie or a TV show, something to watch. And who should we have here in the podcast as our next guest?
Wow. Man, that's an interesting one. A book, I would say, man, like, I'm a big Keith Haring fan, and so to me, I think, if there's a good book out there, just get, anything by Keith Haring, because he was such a loving spirit, and he just made such great work, and it was fun, and it was whimsical, and he was a great guy as well. And so I want to continue to keep putting that out into the universe. So that's one thing.
Okay.
Uh, Movie, uh, my favorites are National Lampoon's Vacation, uh, or any one of the Rocky movies, preferably like the first one, two, and three. Um, and what was the last
A
thing?
guess. Who do you think we should have over?
Yes. Oh, maybe Shepherd Ferry.
Oh, yeah.
Shepherd always got great things to say, and he's taken over the world, so he'd be a great guest.
So now what's next for you? I know you have an exhibition in Austin coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called Combinations, and it's really sort of bringing together all of these different aspects of different times in my life, in addition to recent things in my life. And it's a combination of past and present, um, different elements. And I'm also, for the first time, collaborating with 5 or 6 artists that I've never worked with before. And that's a lot of fun because there are no rules. And when I collaborate with people, I want them to have the freedom to do their thing, and then they give it to me, and then I do my thing. And we hope that it works together. And it reminds me of when Jean-Michel and Andy Warhol collaborated. They just got in a room and they made stuff. And that's what I'm thinking about for this combination show. And it starts on October 21st, and it goes, for the next month or so into November. But other than that, I'm working on a bunch of stuff here in the studio to get ready for Art Basel and in the holidays, and then that's a thing that sort of takes off on its own, and family and all of it. But I got plenty to keep me busy, and looking behind me, I can tell I also have a lot of cleaning up to do.
We all do, my friend. Trust me. Say again, thanks so much for taking the time. This has been such a fun conversation. Yeah, a little bit to know you a little bit, but also, go deeper back in the day and see how the person came to be,
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, say take it easy. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Experience the world of art, design, and culture through Minded Podcast. Engage with groundbreaking artists, visionary designers, and cultural influencers, and delve into their creative processes. Minded Podcast, powered by the CDA. New episodes every Tuesday.